We've all been there. Our beautiful drapey fabric starts misbehaving at the sewing machine, if not before. Mismatched seams, fraying and wonky cutting, there's a reason sewing with lighter weight fabrics has a reputation. But it doesn't have to be like that, and we're going to share our tips for sewing with slippery fabric so you can conquer your gorgeous sewing project. Drapey fabrics make lovely summer dresses. Check out our Seren and Lotta patterns to name a couple, and in this video I'm going to be making a pair of sapphire dungarees from Tilly's Make It Simple book with a polka dot viscose fabric. So here's how to stop that lovely fabric from slipping and sliding all over the cutting table and sewing machine. Starch your fabric before cutting. Before you begin, hang your fabric up on a clothes dryer or rail and give it a light going over with some spray starch, the kind you might use to iron a shirt. This will stiffen the fabric slightly and make it behave itself much better when you lay it out ready to be cut. Of course, we'd recommend testing out your starch on a corner of your fabric first. Cut with a rotary cutter. Have you ever cut out some slippery fabric, only to end up with fabric pieces that are a different shape and size to the pattern pieces? When you cut your fabric with scissors, the blade underneath the fabric lifts it up slightly, and if the fabric is slippery, it can slide down the blade. The results will be that the pieces aren't quite accurate, seams that don't match up, and possibly even clothes that end up too big or too small for you. You'll probably find you get a more accurate result and less frustration by weighing the fabric and pattern down on the cutting mat, and cutting out with a rotary cutter. The blade cuts the fabric as it rolls along without lifting up off the mat. Cut symmetrical pieces in one layer. If you're cutting your fabric on the fold, you may find you end up with a piece that isn't quite symmetrical, as the bottom layer of fabric is sliding around and doing its own thing. One way to tackle this is to mirror your paper pattern piece to create one symmetrical pattern piece, ready to place on your fabric laid out in one layer. This works especially well if you've also starched your fabric to make it more stable, as demonstrated here. You can also create a symmetrical pattern piece by opening your fabric out flat, matching your pattern piece's fold line with the fabric's grain line, cut around the pattern piece but not the fold line, then mark the fold with chalk and flip the pattern piece over to the other side, cutting on one layer of fabric rather than two. Interface pieces before cutting. Small pieces such as neckline facings and collar pieces can be particularly tricky to cut accurately in slippery fabric. And if they need interfacing, you may discover that the interfacing piece and the fabric piece end up looking different shapes because the fabric has slid around when you cut it out. So what I do with small pieces that need interfacing is cut the interfacing first, as it's less likely to slip around than the fabric, then fuse it to the fabric. Then I cut around the outside of the interfacing piece, basically using it as a template. The interfacing stabilises the fabric and makes it much easier to cut out accurately. Use plenty of pins. Pins are your friend when it comes to slippery fabric. Because the fabric layers will slide around, use more pins than you usually would to keep the seams together. Try to avoid positioning the pin heads over the fabric though, as they can distort the fabric. As well as using pins, it can be helpful to tack or baste some seams, as well as darts and pleats etc. before sewing them for real, just to check they go together accurately. And when it comes to sewing them for real, take your time, have some soothing songs playing and you'll be just fine. I hope these tips remove some of the frustration that you may have had with slippery fabrics and will help you enjoy sewing with them.